All right, guys, so here we are for tuna. So this is part 2 of our seafood elective. So right here, this is a #1 yellowfin tuna, okay? So we're gonna be breaking down just the different muscle groups and showing you guys exactly how to fabricate a piece of tuna like this, okay? So this is about a 10-pound portion. This is what would be maybe like a 1/16 of a whole tuna, of a whole yellowfin. So they're gonna be broken up into 8 different pieces, and so this is a little bit small. So this is either coming from a juvenile or this is broken down into a smaller piece than a normal 1/8 would be, okay? So looking at the different parts here, so we have this portion right here. This is the bloodline, right? So this is not edible. This is something that you make sure that you remove. And then from here, you can see that there's a natural separation here where it begins to touch the skin. So this is a part that we're going to remove, and we're going to keep this main muscle group right here. So if you're looking at this in terms of like a beef loin, this is a separation where you've got separation between those muscle groups. And this is going to be our loin that we're keeping right here, okay? So I'm going to start off by breaking this into workable segments. And what I mean by that is this is a very large piece of fish. It's going to be difficult to cut the entire thing at one time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure it out by the length of my hand. And like I was telling you guys in the salmon class, that this is just a good method for measuring, because my hand is about the size of a sheet of nori. So whenever you're measuring this out for a tuna block for sushi or sashimi, you want to make sure that it's about the length of a roll. So that's what I'm doing right here. So I can tell from the length of this that I'm going to be able to get a good tuna steak out of it also. And so I'll show you guys a cut for a tuna steak, something like you might see in a seafood, like in a butcher shop, okay? So we're going to start off with this first cut, and I have my very long slicing knife. This is a 14-inch knife. And so the reason I'm using this is to make sure that I get through it all in one cut. So I'm going to start at the back of the knife here, and I'm just going to come straight down all the way through one slice. Just get a little bit of separation there. Okay, so now you guys can see I've got my workable chunk here, and the next thing we're going to be doing is removing this black portion here, the bloodline. Okay, so turn this aside. Okay, so being able to look over the top and seeing where the portion starts here as well on this side, because I don't want to take off too much. I want to make sure that I'm losing as little as possible. I'm only wanting to remove the bloodline here. So just like we talked about in meat fabrication, there is going to be some natural separation here. So as you're just very lightly cutting through this, you can start to separate it with your hands, with your fingers. So all that dark, nasty material there, it's got a very, very strong iron flavor to it. That's not good. That's not what we're wanting to get there, okay? So I'm gonna move this one aside. We're gonna do the same thing here. So this is tapering down to my side, so toward the tail side. So again, I have to be very careful that I'm changing where I'm slicing as I'm moving toward the tail, making sure that I'm not removing too much edible flesh. Okay, just like that. So those are pieces that we don't want to eat. Next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be separating it from this muscle group right here, making sure that I'm taking this apart, because this has a lot of sinew in it, a lot of connective tissue that is not very tasty, and I'll show you guys what we use that for. So this part right here is also going to be used for scrape. So just taking down the edge here, do a single cut and roll it forward, slicing in downward motion, downward angle toward the skin, making sure that I'm not losing any flesh that I don't need to. So here's the part that I'm going to save for later. This is the part that I'm going to be scraping. So I'm going to set that aside for now. Right there. Now I'm going to be removing this part as well. So I'm going to be doing it on this thicker part right here. Straight down, following the lines underneath, curving down toward the skin. So like I said with the salmon skin, that it's edible, that you can get it nice and crispy. Tuna skin is very, very thick. You're not going to be able to use this for anything. Okay, so this is all discarded. So now I'm looking at my two workable pieces of the tuna. Okay, and then the portion here that's closer to the tail. This portion I'm not going to have as much that's good for like a sushi or sashimi piece. These are going to be better for inside a roll because they're a little bit more tough being closer to the tail. Those muscle groups get worked a lot more, and so they're a much tighter muscle group. So from here, my left hand, this is the bottom. This is the part that was closest to the skin, okay? So this is now the top. This is the portion that we're looking at. This is the top part of the loin. Okay, so from here, I'm going to want to separate this. This is going to be one of the best parts of the tuna. So in a very smooth motion, single cut, I'm going to remove that piece. That's going to be a really good chunk of tuna for us later. Here, I'm now going to separate this portion. So what we're doing now is we're blocking off. Okay, so I'm getting it into clean portions so that I can cut this into clean blocks. Okay, so as we get down to this bottom part here, I'm going to remove some of this, and that's actually going to be used for the scrape also. We're going to set that aside just because you can see how much connective tissue is through here, how much of the sinew is through here. That's going to be very, very chewy. Okay, so that's not going to be very pleasant for a sushi roll. Okay, so for here, first cut, straight through there and down. And so you can see from these two pieces just the difference in color, just how much better this is. So if you're looking at comparison to beef, this is my filet mignon right here. Set that aside. So right here, I'll show you guys cutting through the grain there, straight down, and then down again. And so the reason I have it in blocks like this for this portion, so that now I can use this for sushi or sashimi, cutting by this angle, or I can keep it here and cut in straight linear pieces so that I can use it for inside of a sushi roll. Okay? So like I said, this portion here, a lot of this is got a lot of tough sinew in it. So some of this portion right here, we're actually going to end up using for the scrape. So from here, I can cut this one straight down the middle again, and just show you guys a cross section here so that you can see. So you can see through here, you see all those cross section, all that sinew through there, all that connective tissue. That's very tough and very chewy. So that's going to be my less savory piece of my tuna there. So like I said, this is not always going to be for sushi or sashimi. So I'm going to show you guys cutting a steak here. So just straight down. It's got kind of a horseshoe shape to it, or an oval shape. So this is what you're going to see pretty commonly, like in a seafood, like in a butcher window. Okay. So that's just a regular tuna steak. So great for grilling, has a really strong meaty flavor. So for a lot of people that maybe don't like fish, tuna is really popular because this is something that people can flavor however they want to. It's got a very strong flavor, so it holds up to a lot of different marinades, a lot of different sauces, if that's how you please. Or it can just be simply grilled and a little bit of citrus, similar to other fish. So here we're going to continue removing this tough sinew portion. And again, you guys can see, especially as we're getting closer to the tail, how it's more prevalent throughout and how the groupings are closer together and they're running linear down here. So it's very tough to try to chew through that. You can still get a couple of good portions out of the tail piece here. There, it comes straight across the top. Come down here, discard that for scrape. Save that portion. And then this piece here can still be used for a good piece for slicing sashimi or sushi from. So this can still be a good piece, the top portion of the tail there. I'm gonna get my knife nice and cleaned off. So I'm going to get these organized, and then I'm going to show you guys how to scrape out the belly portion of the tuna and close to the skin. And then I'm also going to show you guys how to get a couple of cuts for sushi and sashimi. Alright guys, so here we have a nice block of tuna, and just showing you guys how to cut across these cross sections here. We can get it to focus in. I moved a little bit too fast there. So you guys can see this. So I'm going to be cutting against that grain, and I'll show you what I mean. So my grain is running this direction. And so I'm going to have my angle of my knife here. So there's a couple of different angles that you have to look at. You have to look at the angle of your product. And then my knife can be here. So here's one angle. And then also the angle at which I'm slicing. So if that makes sense, I'm going to be right here. I'm going to try to maintain a 45 and 45. Meaning a 45-degree angle on my product and then also a 45-degree angle here. Straight through, single slice. So the knife I'm using might look a little large. It's called a kiretsuke. It is for general chef purposes. It's a chef knife, but it also has a sword tip on it so that it can be used for slicing anything that a sashimi or a nagi can be used for as well. So that's why it's a good hybrid knife to have. I'll just continue slicing through this so I could show you guys a couple of different things you can do with this. Okay, so this is a nice piece of tuna. It's yellowfin. It's not the highest quality tuna, but it is a #1 yellowfin. So it is a sushi grade tuna. So I can just break this up a little bit for you guys to see. So just like that, get a nice view there. Moved a little bit too fast again, but you guys can see nice consistent cuts, just like that. So here comes the part that's a little bit less fun. So as an aspiring sushi chef or any place that gets in fresh tuna, you're going to be scraping down this tuna as one of your first tasks before you're allowed to actually fabricate the fish. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm separating out as many segments as possible, making it easier to scrape. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to remove this first layer of sinew here and just break that apart. So right here I can show you guys, making that a little bit easier to scrape that. So now I have a really thin layer that's going to make it a lot easier to scrape than if I'm just trying to scrape that entire portion. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. There's a small layer of bones and connective tissue that's not edible right here. So I'm going to cut through that and cut around it. So like I was telling you guys about the natural separation earlier, you can see that here where there's separation, those connective tissues between those muscle groups. So you can see that there. All right, so that's something you don't want to eat. Even for scrape, we're not eating that. Okay, so again, now that I'm through that layer, I can cut a couple more sections, making it easier for me to scrape through all this. So this can be used for like a tuna tartare, like a ground tuna of any type. But typically what you see it used as in sushi restaurants is spicy tuna. Okay, so this is the portion that they're using for the spicy tuna. Not bad, there's nothing wrong with these pieces. It's just there's a lot of work that goes into it to make sure you're not getting a lot of sinew. So any place that does fresh tuna for their spicy tuna, sometimes you'll see there's a couple little pieces of sinew that you have to chew through, just because they weren't careful in scraping it. Okay, so there's my skin there. Don't need any of that. And toss that down. So now that I have my pieces of tuna to scrape, it's going to be the same motion as I showed you guys for the salmon scrape. Thumb inside the groove of the spoon and be using the bottom portion, the rounded edge, and moving forward to the edge of the spoon that we're scraping out. Okay? If you use too much force, you're going to end up scraping through the sinew and defeating the entire purpose, because now you're going to have a bunch of sinew inside of your ground tuna, your scraped tuna. Okay, so here, moving against those grains, making sure we're pushing all that meat out. So this is one of the first things that you're going to be doing as you're getting into seafood, somebody that's using fresh tuna, just making sure that you're utilizing the entire fish, making sure that we're getting all this scrape out of here. So there is a certain point where you're going to want to stop scraping, because you're going to risk getting too much of that sinew inside of your tuna. It's going to make it very chewy. So I'm going to get to right about here, just about as it turns translucent. You can start to see through to your cutting board. That's about the time that I'm going to stop, because I'm going to get too many of these little pieces connected to it. So I don't want this inside my tuna, okay? That's what we're trying to avoid. So it's very hard to see as you get down to this lighter level. Just making sure that I'm getting as much of this tuna out as possible and scraping that off. So these pieces here we don't need to use. You're going to risk getting too much of that sinew inside of your tuna scrape. So on a different piece, one like this where it's more linear, again, it's going to be very important, but this is much more rigid, okay? So you're going to be able to scrape a little bit harder on these pieces. And again, just going straight with the grain on these linear pieces. And you'll be able to see how much thicker these pieces are than what we were doing just a second ago. So again, using the edge of the spoon, making sure we're scraping out against all these pieces. So I'll show you guys here. So you can see on that, you can see how thick those pieces are compared to what we were scraping before. Okay, so again, this is very, very unpleasant to chew on. So that's why we want to make sure to remove all of this before we start using it for our spicy tuna or whatever we're going to end up using these items for. Take out this little piece. Afterwards, you can always clean it up. You can always take the pieces out as you identify them, but you're going to end up wasting time. It's much faster, much better practice to do this as you're going, making sure that you're not getting any of that sinew inside of your tuna scrape. Okay, so I'm going to continue working on this, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video on tuna, and I hope to see you guys soon.